the fourth in a series of webinars, which we've called Changing the Sex, Race and Class in Education, Changing the Conversation. We suggest you have a look at this in active view. We're scheduled to run till 6. I don't know if we'll take that long, depends really on how many questions are asked. Can you type any questions you've got into the chat as we go along, and then we'll try and deal with them all at the end. We will send you the PowerPoint and any list of resources that we've got that come up. We'll probably put some things in the chat, but we'll send them to you as well afterwards, and you can share the recording with other people, please do. Just occasionally, the connection has been known to drop out, and if it does come back. So just kind of click on the link to rejoin the meeting. We did survive a major disaster in one event where I disappeared for about 5 minutes, but it carried on. So someone did suggest I should do that again, but I'm not planning to on this occasion. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of slides about the data before we go on to ask. And we've got 5 fantastic speakers for you today, 3 current head teachers and 2 others with a very long engagement and experience with the issues around Muslim achievement in education. So the 2011 census data, which of course is currently the 2021 census data is on, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more from that, tells us that Muslims are 4.5% of the population, so it's probably well over 5 by now. And of the 2.5 million, around half are born in the UK, a third from Middle East and Asia, and in lots of ways, the profile of Muslims looks like the profile of the rest of the population. So 1 in 4 Muslim adults has a degree. It's a tiny bit more than that. It's 27% rather than 24.5% for the population as a whole. We have got some more recent data from the school census. And one of the interesting things in that is that the free schools meals rate above identifiable groups, which are predominantly Muslim. So that's Pakistani, it's Bangladeshi. We've also got some data that goes beyond the normal categories that you see. So we know, for example, that Somali pupils, that rate is much higher. And those parts of Africa where other parts of Africa with significant Muslim populations, it's higher. The pupil performance data we have isn't broken down by religion because that data is not collected, but there are some things it does tell us. So we know that in 2019 at Key Stage 2, the 2 large Muslim groups, one was a bit above the national average, Bangladeshi, and one's a bit below. And when I checked back on the 2005 data, which is the oldest set I've got, I discovered it was pretty much the same then. Both have improved a lot over the years, but there's still that kind of level of gap. One of the things we are going to explore today is about place and maybe about class too. Because one of the questions worth looking at is how do Muslim pupils, in this case Pakistani, perform in different parts of the country? And this slide's the GCSE Progress 8 scores. And you can see they're very different. Progress 8 you have to be careful with to be sure it's statistically significant. And actually on this graph, Manchester, Newham, Calderdown and Redbridge, really whichever way you cut the data, Pakistani pupils are doing better than the national average for Pakistani pupils. And Rochdale, Oldham, Kirklees, Peterborough and Sandwell are, whichever way you cut the data, doing worse. So there are some things we can be clear about. That doesn't tell us the reasons for it. And that's part of what we're exploring today. But we know that to be the case. I'm now going to hand over to Rosemary for the next bit.
Thank you so much, Graham, and a very, very warm welcome to everybody who's been able to join us for this webinar. It's a real pleasure to be with Graham again in this Changing the Conversation series of webinars that we're doing, and to focus at this occasion on Muslim students and their attainment in the British educational school system. So it falls to me to introduce one of our first speakers, our first speaker. And it's a real pleasure to introduce Robin Richardson. Robin describes himself very humbly as an experienced educator. Robin was the former director of the Runnymede Trust, and he is the co-director of the beautifully named Instead Consultancy, focusing on issues of equality and diversity. His previous roles have included being being Chief Inspector of Education in the London Borough of Brent. He's also the author of Islamophobia, A Challenge for Us All. I'm one of those long in the tooth educators who's been influenced by Robin Richardson long before I had the pleasure to meet him many years ago. And since then, we've shared a few platforms where we've spoken on different issues. I consider him to be an elder, an activist scholar, and a griot of the highest order. And just to put that in context, a griot in West African tradition is a historian, somebody who is a repository of knowledge, and that knowledge is woven into narratives that are passed on orally from one generation to the next. It's with great pleasure that I hand over to griot Robin Richardson to share a little bit of context, a little bit of story around the issues that we're going to be looking at today. Thank you, Robin. Unmute.
I think I've done it now, haven't I? Good, thank you. I'm not very used to the part of being an elder, as Rosemary calls it, is that one isn't very fluent with Zoom, etc. I'm delighted to be here. It's a great honor to be here with old friends and new friends. As Rosemary said, I've been around for quite a while. It's just over 40 years that I became, I quote, an advisor for multicultural education. That was in Berkshire. Later, I was chief inspector in Brent, the London Borough of Brent. The difference between Berkshire and Brent was that somebody said, in Berkshire, we've got a policy, a race equality policy, which we don't implement. But in Brent, we do implement a policy we haven't got. And it was a very turbulent time in Brent. But there I was in the early part of the 90s, then moved to Runnymede. Runnymede is concerned with race relations. Its founding document, I've got a copy still. This goes back to 1968, Colour and Citizenship. It was a report about Britain's race relations. Well, when I arrived at Runnymede, some of the trustees and some of the other staff wanted to extend the remit of the trust to look at Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and certain other kinds of racism which hadn't hitherto been dealt with by Runnymede. And so it was, and we produced a report on Islamophobia. I brought one to hold up. This is 1997. I won't hold up various things which came. And then I worked as a freelance consultant, often, and indeed mainly, for the DCSF. It's what the Department for Children, Families and and whatever the other schools, I think. You remember anyway. And then the coalition government came in, and there wasn't much employment if you were concerned with equality or race from national government. Anyway, here I am to talk about the context in which and to talk in a fairly anecdotal, autobiographical way, to talk about the context in which today's webinar is concerned with Muslim achievement. Insofar as I'm concerned with changing the conversation, well, certainly that has been a major theme over 40 years of changing the conversation. And there is a changing conversation which needs to happen and is happening in order to get a grip on issues of Muslim achievement. Today is the 5th anniversary, isn't it, of the murder of Jo Cox MP. She is famous for that line in her opening speech in the House of Commons years ago: "We are far more united and have far more in common than what divides us." Those famous words of Jo Cox, and they are a kind of text, an iconic text, if text can be iconic for us here today. And I'm going to start by quoting a poem from America by Langston Hughes. Some of us here this afternoon may know this poem. It's about what we humans, we mortals, have in common. He wrote it in the 1940s. He was born around the turn of the century, died, if I remember correctly, around 1968 or thereabouts. Anyway, it's called Birth, and it seems appropriate that if we're concerned with achievement of children and young people, we should start with a brief poem entitled Birth. I'm going to recite it, I hope, or try to. It's so short that I'll be very embarrassed and ashamed if I dry up and can't remember it. There are only about 30 words in it. Birth by Langston Hughes. Oh, fields of wonder, out of which stars are born, and sun and moon, and me as well, like stroke of lightning in the night, some mark to make, some word to tell. We come into the world from, he says, fields of wonder. We come from the same place that stars come, and that the moon comes, and the sun comes. The whole universe began 13.7 billion years ago. And it's all made of the same stuff. He was well in advance in his cosmology, was Langston Hughes, than most scientists, but he was a poet. Here are the words now on the screen in front of us. Fields of wonder, it starts with a pun. Wonder, we come wondering because we have lots of questions, we human beings, lots of questions which haven't yet been answered about where we come from and what we're here to do. Lots of questions, wondering, but also, of course, wonder is amazement. When Ofsted started, I remember well, about 30 years ago now, they used to look for signs of awe and wonder in schools. I'm not sure whether they still do. I met a head teacher once who was preparing for her first Ofsted, and I don't know whether this is a well-known story, but anyway, she renamed the goldfish in the school foyer and she gave them, the two goldfish, she gave them new names. They were Awe and Wonder. And the idea was that if Ofsted inspectors complained they hadn't seen awe and wonder in the school, she would say, well, you weren't looking because you walk past them every day in the school foyer. I'm not going to pack this talk with irrelevancies like that. But it's relevant in that Ofsted has not been a friend of equalities in education consistently all the time, and particularly since 210, and even more so since the Brexit vote. Ofsted has been against everything we are, or arguably has been against everything we are joined together to talk about and think about and to wonder about. And what do we come to do? According to Langston Hughes, we come for two purposes. We come some mark to make and some word to tell. As a poet, the marks he makes and the words he tells are verbal. But there are other marks, other kinds of mark, and other kinds of word. Each of us is unique and makes unique marks and tells unique words. And that is a start for thinking about education. I now go to another American writer, in fact. Her name is Sabina Khan Ibarra. She's a blogger and journalist. There's a photograph of her here on our screens. She wrote for parents for a few years ago in America about her little baby boy. He was 7 months old at the time. And she said, and the text of what she said is on the screens in front of us, but I will read it if I may, please. Raising a child is a difficult feat. Raising a brown child in America is even trickier. Raising a brown Muslim child in America seems almost impossible. I know my son's, he's 7 months old when she wrote this, I know my son's greatest problem right now is whether or not a teething ring will calm his sore gums. But from a mother's perspective, his future looks gloomy. All the articles I read, the books I've studied, the mothers I've emulated, the advice I've heard, and the baby center updates I have subscribed to. All this is suddenly not enough. My responsibility goes beyond the norm. I have to not only raise a healthy and happy child, but I have to do so in a hostile environment. There's something rather eerie about the fact that here she was choosing the phrase hostile environment in America about her role as a young mother. She was using that phrase at precisely the same time that the Prime Minister and Home Secretary of the United Kingdom were developing it as a policy, the hostile environment policy. And Muslim children and many other children too are being educated in, they're growing to health and happiness if they do, within a hostile environment. And I'd like to just talk slightly more about that. The hostile environment in Western countries does predate Mr. Cameron and his government, of course, very considerably, goes back centuries. But there have been major events, so we haven't got time to recall all the accounts going back to the Battle of Tours over 1,000 years ago, the Crusades almost 1,000 years ago, and so on, and various sieges and wars of liberation, and of course wars of suppression and repression, and also very positive interactions at times. Haven't got time to recall the history. But a major event, most certainly, was on the 11th of September, on 9/11. And here is a piece of writing about the invasion of Iraq. Arguably, it was the invasion of Iraq which changed things more than the bombs, more than the Twin Towers. Here is a teacher speaking, a real teacher, and I seem to remember it was in Birmingham that she said this, and somebody wrote it down, and we used it in those days as a CPD activity. What do you do when you meet somebody who says this? I'm the only South Asian teacher at my school. During the war in Iraq, a pupil who's also South Asian told me that she was being teased by other pupils. We killed hundreds of your lot yesterday. Saddam's your dad, innit? We're getting, maybe it was London, this story. Saddam's your dad, innit? We're getting our revenge for what you Pakis did to us on the 11th of September. I asked her if she told her class teacher. Yes, she had told her teacher, and her teacher had said, never mind, it's not serious, it'll soon pass. You'll have to expect a bit of teasing at a time like this. We used to spend hours talking about that story. Would it pass? Is it trivial? Is it a bit of teasing? Or is it traumatic? Is it traumatic? And is it affecting, as all trauma does, or all trauma has the capacity to do, is it affecting future generations as well as the people who were first impressed and oppressed by it? We will end there just recalling the hostile environment, which more or less consciously or more or less unconsciously we teach and education and interact with young Muslims, and in which they are growing up in this country. Some, indeed many, are quite extraordinary and wonderfully resilient, and they're going to rescue themselves and their families and communities. Others are traumatized. We've got to change the conversation. That was a phrase which was mentioned earlier on by Graham. Change the conversation from talking about Muslims as the enemy and welcoming them as partners. And the next piece of writing is from a publication that I was involved with. There's a picture of it in front of us on the screens. This is what it looks like. It was produced mainly in Warsaw by the Organization for Security in Europe, but also the Council of Europe at Strasbourg and UNESCO in Paris joined. You can't have three more formidable international global organizations than those three. And they produced this little booklet a few years ago. It's available in Russian and in German and French and Spanish, as well as in English. And they wanted to change the conversation about Islam. And they went through the customary conversation and tried to oppose it with a counter narrative. That was their recurring phrase. We've got to change the narrative, a narrative which has been growing for centuries. And the main components in the new narrative, in the counter narrative, are identified as follows. Islam is not monolithic. There is much diversity there. And there's lots of internal debate and deliberation, and there always has been. That is contrary to the Western common sense. The second point about the dominant narrative is that all Muslims are religious. Everything they do is for religious reasons. So another thing that's got to change in the conversation is an awareness that religion is a very complex, nuanced subject. Thirdly, the dominant narrative is about Muslims being different from non-Muslims and being inferior in various respects, morally and intellectually, politically, morally. We've got to emphasize what Joe Cox emphasized, common humanity, having a great deal in common. We've got to recognize that Islamic cultures and civilizations have enormously enriched and changed and transformed over the centuries the cultures and civilizations of Europe. And we've got to see that we're, as the phrase is, we're all in this together. We've got a lot of work to do. And Muslim achievement, which is our concern this afternoon, includes working together as adults, but also as young people, on the shared problems, the us-them polarizations. One of the great moments came in summer 2012, and when I now look, as I come to the end of the 20 minutes that I was offered for this occasion, I come to the Olympic Games in summer 2012. I'm hoping that most people at this webinar are old enough to remember, well, both young enough, but more to the point, that you were adults or almost adults, everyone, that summer 2012, 9 years ago. Danny Boyle organized, he orchestrated that opening ceremony. There was an MP and there was a newspaper, I won't name the MP or the newspaper, that referred to the occasion as multicultural crap. That's what the headline was on one of our dear newspapers. But the country as a whole did not see it like that, but saw it as a celebration of what we have in common. It was full of anecdotes and icons and glimpses of the past, and by implication, glimpses of the future. And this piece of writing says that everyone watching it on that evening could relate to it. They could see things that made them feel they belong here, and that all people in Britain belong here too. Danny Boyle's island story was immensely more dynamic, generous, inclusive, creative and hopeful than what the government was beginning to do and has been doing in recent years, which is promoting what it calls FBV. FBV is ill-considered and mean, stands for fundamental British values, as you know. So that is the end of my introduction, which began with a birth and recalling that we are all here to make marks, to make unique marks, and the children whom we teach and educate at home and in the family and in our classrooms, they are here uniquely to make marks and to tell their word. We're going to tell history, and history is going to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Robin. What I didn't tell you before was that I heard you in 1998 at the National Association of Teachers of English conference, where you did something on a completely different topic, but in that same wonderful way, where you bring together key bits of text and then talk to us about them. It was lovely to hear that approach again. So thank you. Can I ask Rukhsana to introduce our next speaker?
Certainly. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague and my friend, Lubna, who's the head teacher of Berrymede Junior School in Acton, and was a former pupil. And actually, I was a former pupil in the schools that I taught at, as was Raza. And so there's a common theme going on about former pupils going back to their schools to give back. I actually think I've met her twice, but the one time I remember was when I was a judge, I think, for the NIDA Trust. And I was presenting you on stage, Lubna, with an award for outstanding work with Muslim pupils. And then after that, we connected and then we became friends. And I'm absolutely delighted that you've agreed to join us here today. And I know you've got a wealth of experience and lots to share with us. So a warm welcome to Lubna, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rukhsana. I'm sure we will be long-lasting forever friends, which is wonderful. And I do remember that, actually. It just suddenly came back to me as you were speaking. It was a lovely moment. Thank you. I don't profess to be anywhere near as eloquent as Robin, but I will do my best to share some information which I hope will be of use to people. So I've been in education as an educationalist for the last 20 plus years, longer than I care to remember, perhaps. What I wanted to do was to just give you a little bit of a historic perspective on Pakistan and Pakistani students, and then bring you more to sort of recent times, and then to share what's happening with our local community, local Pakistani community, and then more specifically in our school. So, so if I go back to Pakistan then, so it's quite a young country. There are about 52 million children of school age. 23 million of those children are not in school at the moment. 18 million of those are in government schools, and they're not terribly well equipped to deliver education. In fact, one report said that by kind of the age of year 5, they can't string a coherent sentence in the national language. So successive governments have really failed to deliver what's been needed, but it's gone through lots and lots of trauma. However, we have a new government which is doing its absolute best, and I'm hoping over time, we're all hoping over time, that it will reach its goals. So there is hope. So in terms of the UK, about 43%, these are 2009 figures. There was a report commission, which I'll come back to. At that time, about 43% of the Muslims in UK were from Pakistan. 60% of those were from a region known as Kashmir, and particularly from Mirpur, which is a very rural region with largely uneducated, people with largely uneducated background. So there was an influx of that group. And I guess to address the notion that probably all Pakistanis were not the same, there was a report commissioned in 2009 to look at population mapping. You'll have to excuse me, I have to wave my arms because the lights keep going on because we have no controls and they keep turning off, excuse me. So some of the outcomes of that report showed that Pakistanis were very, very diverse. And perhaps that was something that needed to be looked at when deciding how to address some of the issues of underachievement. So at that time, Pakistanis were underachieving quite significantly. If we're looking at a more sort of recent update, and if we're looking at migrations generally, now the migrations tend to be of a more professional nature, doctors, lawyers, etc., people with degrees. There is a growing middle class, women entering professional roles, and integration into community at all levels. I say growing because there's still a long way to go. Those people who'd come from the Kashmir regions may not have had a lot of education, but many of them started businesses, started becoming more affluent, children then going into private schools. And interestingly, lots of money being sent home to Kashmir and that particular region, which has now got one of the best infrastructures for education in the whole of Pakistan. And numbers of children attending school, greatest number in that region. I work with an organization called the Reed Foundation, and I have been for many years, which is a Manchester set up organization from somebody from that region. And they've opened something like 360 schools in the region of Kashmir, built schools, supported existing schools, and it's all funded by the community. So lots of goodwill and lots of recognition that actually education is the way forward. However, other statistics show that 76% of Pakistanis are in the lowest quintile for income and have the highest unemployment rates in the country. At GCSE level, Pakistanis are still underachieving. However, girls are doing better, a bit better than boys. Pakistani pupils in Greater London perform better than those in the rest of the country. And there are lots and lots of other statistics one could look at, but I think I just wanted to highlight the main new headlines, if you like. If we're looking at my local area, so I work in the London Borough of Ealing, which is quite a big borough, and pleasingly, Pakistani achievement in our borough is quite good. And if we're looking at our local borough, at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 4, we're above average, and looking at national levels, again for Ealing children, significantly above average for boys particularly, and girls being in line. And Key Stage 2 is showing a steady progress over time. So the overall Ealing picture is quite good for Pakistani students. If I could go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Thank you. So I thought I'd just talk about some of the challenges and give some insight into understanding the Pakistani community and its diversity. So although in 2009 or prior to that, all Pakistanis were kind of lumped together, if you like, if you start to look at a micro level, there is an awful lot of diversity, and you could almost segregate them into mini countries, if you like, because they are so diverse. So if you look at the slide, some of the differences are quite obvious. There's huge class differences, and that has its own implications. There are religious differences with different sects. Urban versus rural, and Pakistan being quite a large rural country, there is a huge difference in attainment of those children who have then migrated to the UK. In terms of clan, I just wanted to share that I'm from the north, and I am known as a Punjabi, and I come from a clan which is called an Aryan. And my husband is 45 degrees to the west, and he's a Pashto speaker, and he's completely different in every way, shape or form in terms of language. Many of the cultural attributes are completely different. And actually, when I first visited the village, I had all the elders come and see me, and I didn't know what they were saying at the time, but what they were saying was, she doesn't look different. So I'm not quite sure what they expected, because you know, we're from the same country, presumably. And a lot of my friends and colleagues from the UK said, well, how come there is this huge difference? But that just sort of highlights, you know, that within this group, there are many, many different subgroups, if you like. And sometimes integration into those subgroups and across those subgroups has its own challenges. There are numerous regional differences. The extended family, I think even today, has quite a large role, some positive, some not so positive in the Pakistani community. And trying to break that mold sometimes with the elders worried about loss of culture, loss of language, and loss of many things that they had been used to. It seems to me they're really, really desperately trying to keep that all together. But now we have fourth, fifth generation Pakistanis who have less similarities between the elders. But that has been another issue in its own right. Parental education is clearly relevant. And if we're talking about mothers, that I think is a whole topic in its own right. If we're looking at the biggest group that has come from Kashmir, there have been and still are many issues around women and work and the understanding that they need to stay at home, and some quite sad issues around depression, around being oppressed. And interestingly, in the Urdu language, there is no word for depression. So when you are asked, what is it you're feeling? They will say, well, my heart is sinking. So that's the closest they can get to I'm actually feeling really down, really depressed. So that's interesting that the language isn't even there to express that feeling. Affluence and influence. So currently in the UK, there is issues with mental health, high unemployment, and this reconciling of women particularly who want to become professionals, who want to go into education, and that kind of patriarchal society that has existed for a long time, although I feel it is changing. And education in Pakistan, we've just talked about, the sort of backdrop to all of this. Having said that, the more affluent Pakistanis have done exceptionally well. And I think some of us are here to show that no matter what backgrounds we've come from, we've managed to integrate into society, become head teachers, politicians, and professionals in all walks of life. The change is happening, but it's incredibly slow. And I think that is why some of these reports have been commissioned, that, what is it we need to do to look at perhaps more specifically at these subgroups in this particular community. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I thought I'd talk about some of the things we've done at our school. So I've been at this school, as Rukhsana quite rightly said, as a student, and then I've been a head teacher here for around about 10 years. These are some of the things we have done at school to bring people in, and this just doesn't simply apply to the Pakistani community. It could apply to any community. We've got about 45 different languages, people from all over the world. One of the things I think is absolutely crucial is teacher awareness and how much the teachers actually understand about various communities and their nuances, and how we adapt ourselves and our schools and our teaching and our learning to address and be aware of these things. So I'm pleased to say that our teaching community is amazing. We've had fabulous teachers since I've been here and beyond. We do a lot of work with our mothers. We bring them into school, we set up various groups, and I'm sure lots of other schools do this too, and have forums for them to just talk. One project one of our very, very creative teachers ran was something called Acton Man. And they made a statue, children made a statue out of sticks and things. It was a life-size statue, and we got them to, the boys, and it was just mainly aimed at boys, to go home and talk to their dads and say, what does it mean to be a man, in this cultural context or any context? And the children came back with lots of little sticky notes and stuck them all over this Acton Man, and that was our forum for debate. And then we brought fathers in, and it opened up a really amazing conversation, and lots of fathers did a lot of reflection, having looked at this. We've had projects bringing fathers in to read with their children, so having that quality time. One of the unique things we set up in London Borough of Ealing was the Careers Day, which we set up probably about one of the first things I did as a head teacher, and brought in role models of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds. We had about, I think on our first run, we had about 25 professionals, barristers, lawyers, musicians, teachers, and we brought parents in also to have a look and see, what was on offer. One shouldn't limit oneself to any particular institute or any particular profession. And we took part in something called the Brilliant Club, which was set up by a group of teachers looking at more gifted and talented able children, and ran a kind of a module run by a PhD student. Children wrote an essay at the end of it, and it was based on something topical like fair trade. So really got children thinking about issues around the world. Once they'd written their piece, it was marked like a dissertation, and then there was a trip to Russell Brook University where we took parents again to say, you know, we want you to be aspirational and really think about your futures and start now. One of the other things, and I think Robin has alluded to a lot of the kind of issues that have been around Muslims generally, is a sense of belonging. You know, what do our schools do to make our children, our community, feel that they are part of this organization? You know, how do we do that? And again, we have to have those conversations. We have to invite people in where they can feel not threatened, comfortable in saying what they need to say, even if it might be controversial. You know, these are conversations to be had, so long as we're in a safe environment and everybody understands that. Recognizing identity, and again, I think you, as myself, I speak about myself, and in fact anybody, wherever you go, whoever you're with, you will take on a slightly different role. When you're in your teacher role, you're in a different role. When you're a mom, you're in a different role, wife, and so on, so on, so on. And it's okay to have multiple identities. I'm British, Pakistani, Muslim, female, teacher, wife, mother, so on, so on, so on. And it's okay to have that, and it's okay to talk about issues and to find help to get these at least talked about in the first instance. Networking, I have always advocated, hence I'm part of this group now, and bringing in members of the community who are respected members of the community to talk to our parents about issues that are going on and to make them feel that they are listened to and that something is being done. And lastly, I'd like to talk about the Harmony curriculum, which is something originating from Prince Charles's book, A New Way Forward. And I think this particular curriculum looks at aspects of diversity and numerous other themes, and diversity being something beautiful and something to celebrate. And I think if we can get that integrated into our schools, into our people, into human beings, in the way that flowers are diverse, there's no one flower, there are thousands of different kinds of animals, plants, and so on, so on. Similarly, if we can sort of map that onto human beings as having their own beautiful characteristics and sharing all that is good as well as all that is not so good, because that's what makes us. And hopefully, once we've got this curriculum integrated, which is a growing movement, and it's also about sustainability and other things that are probably just as worrying in the world, global warming and so on, to really bring that to the forefront. So these are some of the things. I did miss out some of the things to do with media and some of the negativity around Muslims generally, because you know, other colleagues have talked about it and probably will talk about it. So hopefully, looking at this, you know, we can have some ideas about how we might share good practice. We do a lot of that in Ealing. There's a lot of sharing of good practice among schools, and I'm sure they do that in other boroughs. My one short year in Dubai also helped to open my eyes into what is going on in other places around the world. So it was a Pakistani school. I went there to do my duty, as it were, take some knowledge over and help this school, which was in a bit of difficulty. And I found the children to be, as children are, absolutely amazing, really wanting to learn. It was quite a diverse Muslim population, but the will was there. And I think someone's mentioned, I think perhaps Graham, that the will was there for people to want to better themselves. And the goodwill of teachers in Dubai was absolutely phenomenal. Things I would never get away with in the UK, calling them in on a Sunday morning to spend 4 hours on a workshop. You couldn't do that here and get away with it. And it isn't right, quite frankly. But we were so desperate to make change quickly that everybody was willing to do whatever they could. I think children need inspiration, and their families need inspiration, and they need to feel that warmth, that honesty, and sometimes blunt and open conversations. And that would always be a starting point, I think. Call people in and have honest conversations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lubna. That was a wonderful combination of the philosophical and the deeply practical. So thank you very much indeed. And again, you were emphasizing what I think is one of our themes, which is the Muslim community is very, very diverse. And even within the Pakistani community, there is huge diversity, an issue we might return to in the questions bit, when I might say a bit about Mohsin Zaidi, whose new book some of you will have come across. So can I now ask Rosemary to introduce Sajid?
Yes, Graham. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much, Lubna, for continuing the narrative. We're going now to hear from Sajid Gulzar, and it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce him. Sajid is the founding CEO of the Prince Albert Community Trust. The trust currently consists of 5 primary schools, and Sajid has led that trust in operating a turnaround model that is taking on failing schools and improving them markedly. The latest school to join the trust is Prince Albert High. This is a new secondary free school due to be open to pupils in September of this year. So well done, Sajid. Sajid is a national leader of education, has previously inspected for Ofsted, never mind Sajid, and has worked internationally on behalf of the National Association of Special Educational Needs and Cambridge Education. Sajid is a guest lecturer at the University of Birmingham's Education Leadership Academy and has served on the West Midlands Regional Schools Commissioners Head Teacher Board since 2017. In June 2019, Sajid was awarded an OBE for his services to education. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sajid Gulzar.
Hi, Rosemary. Thank you for that introduction. I'm not quite sure how I've managed to deserve such an introduction. It sounds like you're speaking about somebody else, because I'm just a kid. If you know Birmingham, I'm just a kid from Allen Rock. So it's amazing where life takes you. This is a topic that's obviously very, very, very close to my heart, given that I am yet another panelist who had the opportunity to go in and go back to my school. Highfield School is a school where I started in reception in 1978 and left at the age of 11 in 1985. I was lucky enough to go back in 2016 to a school that had been special measures in the wake of Trojan Horse, and that's probably a topic in and of itself. And now it's a good school for the first time ever in its history. In terms of Ofsted, outcomes are greatly improved, and it's a thriving school community. You know, full form entry, some 800 odd kids, predominantly Pakistani Muslim, and within that group we've got a large number of Kashmiri kids from the Mirpur region, Pashto speaking kids, etc., etc. So all of the diversity that Lubna was talking about. And our trust is very much a trust that predominantly serves the Muslim community. Four of our schools, of our 5 primary schools, are predominantly Muslim. Within that, again, a lot of diversity. Highfield, as I said, predominantly Pakistani Muslim. At Birchfield, there's a significant minority of Indian, Gujarati Muslims. And at Heathfield and at Prince Albert, there's a significant proportion of Bangladeshi Muslims, and all of those nuances and flavors and differences that Lubna alluded to. And in some senses, the kind of homogenizing of the Muslim community, and I get that we're very much about busting that myth here. And we get that, but I think there's a lot of work to be done, because, you know, we are lumped together in one group, and that can sometimes be unhelpful. But also, I think we all understand that socioeconomic factors are significant when we're talking about achievement of any children, and those youngsters who are Muslim but are from affluent families, or families where parents have degrees and are professional, their life chances, we know, are significantly better than the youngsters from the communities generally that we serve. So I think disadvantage is an issue on its own, and a bit like the American author that Robin quoted, talking about her 7-month-old, it's doubly disadvantaging often for youngsters who are Muslim and born into families that are struggling financially, often ghettoized, and certainly we see that in Birmingham all the time. And within our own school community, we can see that there's a significant difference in life chances. Generally, for example, if you're born into a Kashmiri family compared to a Gujarati family, despite being Muslim, and essentially for me, and I'm going to cover a lot of the ground that Lubna covered. So Lubna's stolen my thunder. That was bound to happen. So hopefully I'll be able to bring something to that. But essentially, my view is that meeting the needs of any community, those sound principles apply regardless of what that community is, be that a community that's predominantly white working class, or a community where it's predominantly Sikh, or a community, whatever the thing is that defines that community. I think the principles apply across the board, and it's about really understanding as educators what matters to the community. And often what's lost when we are meeting the needs of the Muslim community is the importance of faith to that community. Now, it's clear, as Robin pointed out, and others have said, that there is a huge spectrum of levels of understanding, of practice, of affiliation within the community. But generally, and it's always dangerous to generalize, but generally, particularly where we are in Birmingham with inner city Muslim communities, compared to other communities, the communities tend to be more religiously conservative. Religion tends to play a more central part in life in general, and tends to be much more an aspect of identity than some other communities. And it's an understanding of the importance of that. And that's often missing when schools are struggling to address the needs of a community that tends to be predominantly Muslim. The other thing that's really important, and again, Lubna touched on it, is the understanding of the staff who aren't Muslim. It always amazed me when I was a newly qualified teacher, that many of the staff took their understanding of the faith from 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old children who clearly themselves didn't understand it, which child does at that age, and then drew conclusions about the community and how to engage with the community from the understanding of children who are as young as 4 and no older than 11 at primary school. So this sense of where are we getting our information from, how we gaining the knowledge that we need to serve the community that we're serving. And a story that really stands out for me, my mentor, my leadership mentor, when I was a deputy head, and a man who's sadly no longer with us, and who completely transformed the narrative in Birmingham around the expectations of children in inner city schools, predominantly Muslim inner city schools, who really broke the ceiling in terms of primary school achievement. And his school really stood out in terms of what youngsters were achieving in the early 90s onwards. A man called Richard Hornsby, and as my mentor, I learned a great deal from him about leadership and about the business of running a school. But one of the very first things he did when he took on the headship of a school in Small Heath in Birmingham, high percentage of Muslim children, Muslim families, predominantly Kashmiri families from the Midborough region. One of the first things he did was he went to the mosque at the end of his road, and he engaged with the mosque because he knew the importance of the mosque within that community. And he continued to engage with that institution throughout his 12 years of headship. And he was very proactive in approaching community organizations, in engaging with them, in understanding them. And much of his work was around getting that community to engage with him and understanding that he was there as one of them, that he was very much a part of that community as the head of the school. And that school truly became a school at the heart of the community. And some of the stuff they did and continue to do was really, really transformative. Other things that, again, a really generic good practice, regardless of the background of the youngsters, is what are the expectations? What are the expectations the school has of the children, of the parents, of the staff? So if you want your children to achieve and they happen to be Muslim, in a sense, what's that got to do with anything in terms of what you expect from them? You should expect them to achieve. You should expect them to be successful. It's your job then to make that happen. And part of making that happening, is the stuff that I've been talking about in terms of engagement and understanding. And then how is that engagement happening? I talked about the example of Richard, but also representation is really important. How representative is the staff of the school that you serve? And even now, even today, in 2021 in Birmingham, in the inner city, there are some schools where there is very little representation of the community amongst the teaching staff. And there are a few more schools where there is little or no representation of the community amongst the leadership of the school. So when those issues occur, when there are tensions, when greater understanding is needed, and I'm sure you've all seen in the media this issue with the RSC curriculum and protests outside of schools. Interestingly enough, I think there are probably in excess of 50 schools where the majority of the intake identifies Muslim, primary schools. But these problems, these really kind of publicized and intense and difficult problems occurred in a very small number of those schools. And that begs the question, why is it that in the vast majority of those schools, with fairly conservative Muslim communities who had very similar concerns and questions to the schools where the protests happened, didn't experience the same problems? But it was by no means the majority of schools that experienced these problems. It wasn't even half. It wasn't even a significant minority. It was a small minority. And that begs questions about all of the things that I've been talking about. Alongside all of this, in order for children to achieve to be successful, it's really helpful if they're able to see themselves in those positions that they're aspiring for in terms of academic success or the professions that you want for them. So this idea of role models is really, really important. And in Islam, there is a rich history of achievement and contribution to the world that goes back 1400 years. Robin mentioned the Battle of Tours, and that was at a time when Muslim Spain was one of the most advanced societies on the face of planet Earth. 9th century Granada, hot and cold running water and street lighting and so on and so forth. The Enlightenment in Europe is born out of Muslim learning and academia in the Middle East. Much of our understanding of science comes from the Muslim world. So there is a rich heritage there for us to call upon. And representation in that sense matters, but also belonging is really important. I've just written a piece which I published on Twitter on the challenges for somebody like me supporting the England football team. and you know, coming out of the racism of the 70s and 80s and the association with the flag of the Union flag of the and the St. George Cross and so on and so forth. And there is a wonderful opportunity in schools that's being missed that would support youngsters having a sense of belonging based on the historical contribution of Muslims to modern life in terms of the sacrifice of Muslim soldiers in World War I and World War II, for example. You know, the hundreds of thousands of Muslims that came over from the Commonwealth and fought and died, those that are buried at Horsell Common in Surrey from World War I and World War II. And these stories that are missing from our curriculum, that are there, that exist. You know, when you watch the film Dunkirk, and it's a fantastic movie, but actually people of color are conspicuous by their absence. Popular culture has erased an entire aspect of our history, and of how we got to where we are. That's really important to the learning and understanding of Muslim youngsters in school, that would really promote their idea and understanding of belonging, that they deserve to be here because of the sacrifices of their forefathers. And I often heard growing up, you know, go home, go back to where you came from. My granddad died for the, you know, and had I only known that actually, you know, there were very many people from my granddad's village that fought and died here too. I could have had that riposte, but you know, all too late now. But the point still stands. There is that really rich history that would support a more representative curriculum. Literature, for example, you know, and there is a debate in education now, thankfully, finally, about the content of our literature syllabus, both at primary and secondary school. And there's an increase in British-born non-white authors that are making their way into schools, into classrooms, and guided reading sessions, and the syllabus at Key Stage 3 and so on and so forth. And that's really, really important, because our voice is important, because our experiences are different. And our children need to understand the experiences of the generation before them and the generation before that. And you know, it amazes me when I think that both my grandfathers were docking in places like Liverpool and Bristol at the turn of the century, you know, early 20th century, and that we had a presence as Muslims here, that the court of Elizabeth I had regular visitors from the Muslim world in terms of diplomats and those kind of retinues, and so on and so forth. So that there's a rich Western European history that's intertwined with Muslim history. You know, the breaking of siege lines in the ocean to get food convoys, the Ottomans getting food convoys to starving Irish communities in the 17th or 18th century, whenever that was. There is a really rich history of Muslim presence and contribution in Western Europe, and that needs to be unpicked and taught and shared. And it's also about creating an environment where all of us, adults, children, regardless of our background, how we identify, that we're able to bring our authentic selves, because it's only when we bring our authentic selves that we're able to really fulfill our potential. So our job, I think, as educators, is to create a culture and live by a set of values that enables youngsters to see themselves as people who have been enabled and can succeed. And whatever they're bringing, be that their Islam, be that their identity as Pakistanis or Indians, or be that their language, that those are seen as superpowers, those are seen as things that add value to them. I mean, language is really interesting. I spoke to you know, my nephew, who's a very successful businessman, travels all over the world. And he said to me, you know, I wish I spoke another language. And I said, you speak 3 as well as English. And he said, yeah, but they're not really languages, are they? And that's because of how marginalized our mother tongues were when we were going through the education system in the 70s and 80s. That these languages that are rich in their own history of poetry and literature and all those sorts of things have been so marginalized that some of the speakers feel that they're not even languages, even now. So I think in terms of Muslim achievement, and I'm going to stop because I haven't even got onto our success, which we've had some success in achievement, and because we see youngsters as youngsters, not as, you know, the labels, although the understanding has to be there of where they're coming from and valuing that and supporting that. I think, you know, one of our schools is predominantly white, working class white British. The approach is exactly the same. Value what they bring, ensure that they can be their authentic selves, have sky high expectations of the youngsters, by extension their families, and of the staff that serve them, and you get that outstanding achievement across the board, regardless of whether the youngsters are Muslim or not. I think I've run out of time, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you very, very much, Sajid. That towards the end there, you reminded me of a time when I was asked. I used to be a councillor in Waltham Forest, and I had to speak to a local society, which was a group of Pakistani men who loved poetry. So I, as an English graduate, thought I'd kind of quote a bit of "Summer is a Coming In," because it's one of a handful of English poems we know well from a period when Urdu was the language in which the most sophisticated poetry in the universe at that time was written in a very, very large volume. And I think we've got, you've picked up the themes that others have done, but I think you've really opened up another. And I see that in terms of decolonizing the curriculum, Lubna's commented on what she's doing about it as well. And I think Rukhsana may have something to say about the heritage in terms of science and art when we get to her bit. So it's my pleasure to introduce Raza. Raza used to be the acting head teacher of Leytonstone School, where I believe he went. Leytonstone School, for those of you who don't know the location, is pretty much, his playground is a stone's throw from the maternity unit at Whipps Cross Hospital, where both of my children were born. And I know actually from the first time I was there on some occasion, noise, very loud noise comes out of the maternity unit. That's probably even louder than what's coming out of the playground. He's currently the head of the Chalk Hills Academy in Luton, which is a school I've had the pleasure of working with for about 3 years before he arrived. So I hope he's going to say that what I did worked, but it's a lovely school. And I'm delighted that you can join us, Raza.
Graham, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I do have to pinch myself a little bit because I'm sharing the platform with such esteemed colleagues. I mean, the two colleagues that just went before me in Lubna and Sajid, you know, yes, obviously this is my sort of third headship, but I feel like I've still got so much to learn from other colleagues. So thank you so much for that. My sort of whole presentation was going to be more around sort of practical sort of examples, things that we've or challenges we've faced, and ways that we've dealt with it, and you will hopefully at the end of it resonate with some of them, and certainly you might be able to take something away and sort of say, okay, maybe that's something that we can implement in our sort of context and environment as well. Before I begin, everything that both Lubna and Sajid have said, they are so crucial, and there's definitely going to be some overlap with what I say now as well. My context in terms of the schools I've worked in, incredibly diverse, very similar to some of the demographics that have just been explained earlier on. And yes, okay, the topic of conversation of today is how do we address Muslim underachievement. And there's really, for me, there's two ways to look at it. The first way to look at it is actually to accept that actually some strategies to address Muslim underachievement are actually very common to the strategies that you're going to use for all underachievement. Just because they're Muslim, that doesn't mean that you suddenly reinvent the wheel completely. So things like speaking to parents and carers, things like having high expectations and aspirations, and sort of having those extra support sessions, etc. You know, we do that for all students. There is no sort of special sort of one that we use for Muslim students specifically. But on the flip side, we also know that actually to address Muslim underachievement, it's not as simple as that. You have to have a bespoke strategy, because some of the issues that come along with Muslim underachievement are complex. And for me, the one thing I've learned before I actually go into some of the strategies is that it's really, really important that, you know, you're bold, you're courageous in some of the steps you have to take when you're addressing underachievement, certainly the Muslim underachievement that I'm going to speak about. And in some cases, there are things that are outside of your control. You know, Sajid mentioned earlier on that, you know, things like educating parents in our communities, that's something that's out of your control. There's only so much you can do as an educationalist. But is that then a reason for us to sort of put our hand up or wave the white flag and say we give up? Absolutely not. In certain cases, we have to sidestep that and really still try to get to the bottom of this underachievement. But ultimately, I think the most important thing that I've certainly found that's helpful, and this is the way I sort of work with our staff, but also with our parents and carers, is to remind them that the decisions that we're making, and sometimes it's easy to forget this, but the decisions that we do make, of course, the students are always at the center of these decision making. You know, I always say, my mantra is always, you know, I'm creating a world-class school. And, you know, if anybody ever asks, what is a world-class school? It's a school that you're proud to send your own children to. And that's the philosophy that we always have across our school. So in terms of the examples, I've kind of broken down these examples into kind of two categories. The first category I'm calling sort of reactionary responses, and the second category I'm calling proactive responses. So in terms of reactionary, I'll give you one example. The first example is that quite common amongst secondary schools and sixth forms, you tend to have what we call an after-school intervention. You know, students are underachieving, they've just done a mock exam, you're now going to put in some enhancements, some catch-up sessions. And I remember when I first started in Leytonstone School, we tried to get our enhancement sessions up and running. And unfortunately, when we first launched it, we quickly realized actually it was only the middle class, the white middle class students that were going. And it pains me to say that unfortunately, many of our Muslim students, many of our students from Black and minority ethnic groups, they ended up going to the chicken shop after school. So rather than going to the actual intervention sessions, they were used to going to the park, to the chicken shop, etc. So we thought, okay, how do we overcome that? Well, we reacted by saying, okay, period 6, in order to make sure that every child goes, we're going to make it a compulsory session. So we extended our school day and we said, okay, from now on, we are going to make sure that every child comes along, and there is, you know, an expectation that an after school session is treated in exactly the same way as your standard session. Another example, when it came to subject choices, yeah, we had those common stereotypes. Our Black Muslim students, oh, well, they're very fit and healthy, and they must be very, very good at sport. You know, our Muslim students from Indian heritage, you know, oh, they're naturally gifted in maths. They must be very good at maths. So let's put them down the science pathway. You know, our white middle class students, they're very, very, you know, humanities focused. They're very artistic. Let's put them down that pathway. Well, we needed to get rid of those stereotypes. Why is it that our Black Muslim students were only doing sport? You know, why can't they do the humanities subjects? Let's really, really address that at its heart, and let's really have those uncomfortable conversations. And then more recently, we had parents and carers, students writing in, sort of saying, oh, sir, it's Ramadan. You know, my mum said, I can't partake in music lessons because you shouldn't listen to music. Well, no, we're not asking you to do anything different. You'll do music as part of the curriculum. You do it in any given day. Why can't you do music just because it's Ramadan? That doesn't give us an excuse. We're still going to continue as it is. So it's really, really important that we actually, as I said, we address those challenging questions, but when we address them head on. So there's some of the reactive sort of responses that I said. In terms of proactive, I'm sort of describing these as things that you can do before you get to some of those challenges that I've said. So the first thing I felt, and sometimes this I feel like is undervalued, and that's making sure actually that we show our Muslim students, as we show all our students, we show them that love and warmth that sometimes they might not get at home. Right? We know that Muslim students come with incredible challenges in their home life, etc. And linked into that, showing our students empathy, putting yourself as leaders, but also educationists in their shoes. Only this week, it was yesterday, I had a group of students in our school that wear the hijab. And, we know the weather is very hot at the moment. They were saying, oh, sir, currently the school policy is that you have to tuck the end of your hijab inside your shirt. That's making us very uncomfortable. Could we do something about it? So what I said is, okay, yeah, of course, let's have a roundtable discussion. Let's work on a solution together. How can we make sure that we still, adhere to the school behavior policy or the school uniform policy as closely as possible, but at the same time, make your experience of wearing the hijab a comfortable one? And that was a really, really good way of moving forward in terms of working with the students. The other thing, currently my current school, we are in the center of Luton. Luton, for those that know it, is a very, very diverse borough. And, one of the things I'm trying to do as a way of trying to educate our parents, but also showing our parents that, schools in 2021 may be very, very different to their own schooling experience. We really, really go the extra mile for our students, etc., etc. But how am I doing that? I'm opening up our school doors where possible. Yes, at the moment it's difficult under the restrictions of COVID, but where possible, opening up our school doors and using it as a community hub and sort of saying, right, why don't you come in? Let's invite you in. Let's see. This is what your students are going for. This is what your children are going for on a day-to-day basis. How can we work together to support your students during the school day, but also possibly after the school day and weekends? And finally, this really, really resonated with me. Sajid just touched upon this, but giving our students role models. Students spend the majority of their time, sometimes in some cases, they spend more time in schools than they do at home. Making sure that they have role models that look like them. But it's no good we've had this debate, people that are on this panel have had this debate for years and years. But what can we do that's practical, that actually is going to go beyond just the talk? So, one of the things we've done, certainly in my school, I'm very proud of having this situation, is we've got at least 50% of our senior leadership team reflects the community that we serve. We're adopting, where possible, we're adopting that sort of a kind of version of the Rooney rule that they use in American football, where they say whenever they recruit a new American football manager, it has to have at least one black candidate shortlisted. We're adopting a similar rule, whereby we're saying that actually we're going to have a certain threshold that is going to reflect our student population. So we're trying to do very, very proactive steps that hopefully are not going to get us into some of those situations that I spoke about earlier on. So essentially what I'm concluding is that, yes, Muslim underachievement, yes, it's an ongoing challenge, but we as leaders, as educationists, we really, really need to be bold. We need to personalize our approaches. We can't just say, okay, yeah, Muslim underachievement is the same as any underachievement. We really need to have those uncomfortable situations. We need to tackle those uncomfortable situations head on. But equally, we need to do it in a way where our students are always at the forefront, but we're also working with the stakeholders around us to get to those end goals. That's it from me. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Raza. Thank you for that. Again, you've brought in new things and thrown some challenges down, but you've picked up the themes, I think, in particular we've had elsewhere about you just have to understand the communities that you work with and for, really know how they think about things if you're going to enable them to get the best possible deal out of school. And I'm really glad to hear you say, yeah, workforce. There's no reason why it shouldn't reflect the communities it serves if you want it to be so. There are lots of things you can do to make that happen without any compromise at all on quality, quite possibly with the reverse effect on quality. So I'm now going to turn to our last speaker, who is Rukhsana, who again, I think is going to pick up some things we've heard earlier. But I think, Rukhsana, I first met you in the early 2000s, when you were working for the national strategies on, I'm trying to remember what MEEP stood for, Multi-Ethnic Achievement Project.
Program.
Yeah. So I'm going to find your 3 or 4 slides. And
Great.
it's over to you.
Thank you. Actually, Graham, I think we met before I worked in the national strategies when we were working on investing in.
We might have done, yeah, yeah. So it's Rosemary that introduced us.
I did the local authority bit, and I did the school bit when I was at school. Yes, yes, yes. Small interconnected world. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I hope you can hear me. My voice is a bit croaky. I think I've got hay fever, which I've never had before. Sorry. The theme that we're looking at today, is there anything different in raising Muslim achievement that is different to raising achievement? And as many of the speakers have said before, there's a lot of overlap, and there are actually, when you come down to it, very few Muslimnesses, but I'm going to touch on a few of them. Just before I start speaking, I want to say a huge thank you to Robin and your beautifully woven presentation. It was absolutely inspirational. And I just have to say, seeing the picture of the 2012 Olympic Games, I have to share with everyone on this session that my claim to fame, apart from education, is I was actually at the 2012 Olympic Games I was a volunteer, and I was one of 1,000 drummers, and I was drumming in the stadium when that event happened, and I was standing there looking at the rings as they came down, and it was, you're right, Robin, it was a really emotional moment, and it was a very multicultural and respectful event. So thank you for reliving those memories for me. If you just go on to the first proper slide, Graham, I'm going to be talking about. Can you go on to the next one? Ah. Okay, just go back one, sorry. Okay, I'll just speak generally. Perhaps I've sent you the wrong slide, sorry. So as a teacher, I believe it's absolutely essential to have high aspirations and a belief that children can achieve, and this has to be supported by strategies and modelling. And I'm going to talk about a number of things that I've been involved in. So the first one is in the national strategies. As Graham said, I was working on a programme called the Minority Ethnic Achievement Programme, or MEEP, and that was the national strategies was a working arm of the Department for Education, and it was actually a specific programme designed to raise the attainment of Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Turkish and Somali pupils, because the Department for Education had identified that in 17 local authorities, which were around London, Birmingham and Manchester, Muslim pupils were not achieving. And so I worked with people in those local authorities to help raise attainment. I'll just speak to the slide that you can see, because that's the actual programme, the 4 strands of the programme that I worked in. So the 4 areas of the programme were, as you can see, leadership and management, data, teaching and learning, parents and community. And I think Chiaka's on this call as well. And Chiaka was one of the people I was working with, I believe, in Haringey on this programme to raise attainment of Muslim pupils. I'm not going to say too much about the first 2, and I'll give you an example for the other 2. So but I will say a little bit. So leadership and management, basically, if leadership and management was positive and the school or the local authority or the department were engaged, the programme was more likely to succeed. And if leadership and management wasn't on board, you might as well actually forget it, because if you didn't have that support, nothing was going to happen. Data, this was a program about 10, 12 years ago, so there's a huge amount of data in schools at that time, but people weren't using it effectively. And I'm not going to say very much more on data, because I think schools now are more efficient and positive about using data in a meaningful and effective way. The third area, teaching and learning, is at the heart of what schools are about. So a lot of the program actually focused on teaching and learning. And a lot of the time when we were talking about teaching and learning, we were actually quite a lot of the time talking about using EAL, English as an Additional Language strategies. So I'm going to give you an example of Enfield local authority, where the schools decided to use an EAL teacher and a science teacher to work together. So on a Monday morning, first period, they'd work together to plan lessons for the week. And then at the end of the week, they'd review it. And the next Monday morning, they'd review what's happened and try and improve and plan for the following week. It was even more effective in one school where they had the EAL consultant and the science consultant from the local authority come in and join that planning. And when the teachers got stuck or weren't sure or things weren't successful, they actually modelled that in the classroom. So that gave the teachers more confidence. So that was very powerful and effective. And the pupils in that science group actually by the end of the year had more value added than any other group in the school. But that was quite expensive in terms of time and resources. But the benefits of that was not only to the children involved in the programme, but it was also for the EAL teacher and science teacher to use what they'd learned for other groups throughout the school. So that was really, really powerful and effective, and one of the most significant impacts on attainment was made there. The fourth one, parents and community. A few people have touched on parents and community. I think this out of the four strands was actually the hardest to crack, and it wasn't easy, but where people tackled it and were able to be successful, it was really, really powerful. I'll give you an example. In Mulberry School in Tower Hamlets, a senior leader was appointed to do some work with parents and community, and so she tried to get some of the parents, it's a girls' school, so she tried to get the Bangladeshi mums into the school and had great difficulties until she recruited a teaching assistant to help her, who was actually, the teaching assistant had children in the school and was well known by other parents in the community. And everything that she did, she ran past this teaching assistant. So when she decided the timing of the day, it didn't work. But when she spoke to the teaching assistant, she said, well, why don't you do it first thing in the morning when the mums drop children off to school, they've dropped the little ones off to nursery, and then start the classes then. So she started very small and ran a few classes, and then she asked the mums what they wanted and increased the number of classes. Within 3 years, they had so many classes during the school day, after school, at weekends, and they had waiting lists for those classes. So that's an example of very powerful improvement where you have, and I think it was key that it was a senior leader who was leading, so they could speak to the head and get money and resources, and that was very powerful. So this program for pupils, it was targeting pupils in at the beginning of year 8 till the end of year 9. So it was a 2-year program, and it was in English, maths or science. And after 2 years, the pupils were monitored, and it was found that the local authorities involved in the program and the schools involved in the program achieved. Some achieved more, some achieved less. In general terms, I mean, I know Graham was talking about the data earlier. The picture's quite complex because we found that schools outside London didn't do as well as schools in London. We found that girls did much better than boys. At the end of the programme, when we looked at all the data again, remember we started with 17 local authorities where Muslim children were not achieving. These Muslim groups were Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Turkish and Somali, which is the order of the magnitude of the groups. But by the end of the programme, Bangladeshi pupils were almost reaching national average levels. Pakistani pupils were slightly behind. Turkish pupils were slightly behind that, and the Somali pupils were the lowest achieving group, even within that. So once you start looking at data, it gets quite complicated. Graham, is there another slide, or I'm going to talk about a few other things? No, I think I might have got my slides wrong. I'll just speak, it's fine, it's fine. While you've got the slide up, I think resources are really important, and some people have alluded to them before. So there's a good friend of mine who's sadly passed away, Maurice Irfan Coles, and he wrote a book, Every Muslim Life Matters. And within that, it's got the different areas of the curriculum and how you can incorporate Muslim values and history in those different subject areas. 1001 Inventions by Professor Salim Al-Hassani is a book of really useful resources, which Sajid referred to earlier. So it's talking about the golden age of Islam and Islamic civilization. And there's lots of really useful resources. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend 1001 Inventions. There's a video with Ben Kingsley. It's a 12-minute video, and it's a Harry Potter style video, which is, I'd suggest that everyone look at it because I think it's really useful. National Strategies produce some resources, and I've sent some links to Graham. And there's another book, I'm going to show it to you very briefly. I don't know whether you can see it. It's a huge book, The Timeline of Islamic Art and Architecture, and it's a beautiful book. And there are different resources that I came across. Graham, have I got a few more minutes? Great. Okay, I've got a list of, I might take about 4 or 5 minutes. So I was going to say that as a teacher, it's essential that all teachers have high aspirations and a belief that children can achieve. And this has to be supported by strategies and modelling. Really high expectations are absolutely key. I've talked about the MEET programme. The second area, I've got 5 areas. The second area is recognising specific needs of Muslim pupils. So I would say most of the schools in London would have all these things, but if there's a school that doesn't have Muslim pupils and suddenly gets Muslim pupils, the Muslim specific things are include provision for halal meat, prayer facilities, especially during Ramadan, and uniform considerations like trousers and headscarf. The next area is having a relevant curriculum, which recognises the background of the pupils and authors from Muslim backgrounds. For example, in English, for example, Rumi poetry could be incorporated into the English curriculum, learning about migration patterns and when many Muslims arrived in the 60s and 70s, learning about that in history. Islamic patterns in art and mathematics. I'm going to share with you 3 or 4 examples. I don't know whether you've heard of these or not, but there's somebody called Noor Inayat Khan. I don't know whether anyone's heard of her. She was a Muslim war heroine who was actually a British spy, and posthumously she died. And after she passed away, she was actually awarded the George Cross. There's another woman, I love stories of women, as you can tell. There was a woman who was born in the 1800s, 800 AD. Her name was Fatima Al-Firi, and apparently she built the first university in Fez in Morocco, and apparently all universities now are made, and that was one of the first universities made by a Muslim woman, a very rich Muslim woman at that time. There's somebody called Ibn al-Haytham, who was considered to be the father of modern optics, and he discovered that light travels in straight lines and that you get an inverted image in a pinhole camera. So all these examples and a lot more are in the book 1001 Inventions that I said. The next area is positive role models, which several people have mentioned. And within positive role models, I'm going to say 3 things. So One of them is investing in diversity. So Rosemary ran a program at the Institute of Education called Investing in Diversity, which helped Black and ethnic minority teachers gain promotion to senior leadership and headship level. And I was one of the tutors on that program. I'm very proud to be. And within 5 years, 1,000 Black and ethnic minority teachers went through that program. And I believe one of the positives from that program was that at that time, it doubled the number of Black and ethnic minority head teachers in London. And as several people have said, positive role models and seeing yourself in different positions in the school is really important. In the school where I was a deputy head, I was the only person on the senior leadership team, and the only other Muslim people were either teaching assistants or helpers in the classroom, midday assistants and cleaners. So I think it's really important for people to see positive role models at high levels in particular. I've mentioned that I was part of the Teachers Association, and Lubna I worked with at that time. And what we did is we ran training for teachers to give them confidence. We supported them in writing successful applications. We did one-to-one mentoring. We gave them interview practice, and also supported teachers when they were going through disciplinaries and facing difficulties. And the other thing about role models, before I go to my final point, is I also think current positive role models are important, because people like Malala, who was the youngest Nobel Prize winner, somebody like Nadia Hussain, the winner of Bake Off, Mo Farah, the athlete. I think those sorts of role models in the present day who are relevant to children in schools, and they see them in a positive way, and they're portrayed in a positive way, is really, really important, not as with negative connotations, which a lot of Muslims are portrayed by in the media. And the last point I was going to say was working with others outside school. No matter how good and excellent a teacher you are in your classroom with your children, or you are as a head teacher in your school, there are other agencies outside which also influence what you can and can't do. And I'm thinking about Ofsted, Department for Education, Teachers Union, and other official bodies. So I think it's really important that Muslims are represented and speaking to all these bodies. And as part of the Muslim Teachers Association, I did speak to Amanda Spielman at Ofsted. We were conversing with the Department for Education, and not just when there are problems. I think it's really important to have that relationship, so when problems occur, discussions are much easier. And an example I'm going to give is I worked with ASCL, one of the head teacher unions, and during Ramadan, it was the time when Ramadan fell in the examination periods. We, ASCL and various Muslim organisations, wrote an information paper about Ramadan and what it meant to Muslim pupils and what schools could do about it. So they're just my random thoughts, and I apologise about the slides. I'm just going to finish by saying that we need our children to thrive and live in an environment that all our children feel a part of, and do not have to hide their identity or leave their beliefs and values at the door when they walk into school. And I'm thinking about not myself, I'm not even thinking about my children who have grown up, but I'm actually thinking about my 4 beautiful grandchildren who are under 5, and you know what they're going to experience in the future in schools and in their lives. And I love the phrase, I think Sajid said, bring out authentic self. I think that's beautiful. So I think I'll just stop there, Graham, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Rukhsana, for picking up many of the themes other people use, but adding some things. So I particularly want to say thank you for reminding us all that partnership teaching is probably the most effective form of professional development there is. It's expensive and worth every penny. Absolutely. Thank you for giving me my copy of that book many years ago, which you may have even forgotten that you did, but you did. Thank you for pointing me towards that wonderful 12-minute clip you mentioned, which when we send out the PowerPoint, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to the PowerPoint. but there is a live link to it in the thing we're going to send out, so people can pick it up there and find it. This is the bit where people can ask questions. So they're at the, I can't see any in the chat. I can see a lot of people saying lots of nice things about what's happened, but there aren't. If somebody does want to ask a question, if they could just sort of do the hand raising thing.
Well, whilst they're doing that, Graham, can I just
Come in, yeah.
say a few words? I mean, the speakers have been absolutely fantastic, and that's been reflected in terms of people's comments within the chat. It reminded me of a number of things. Robin starting with reminding us of the context, and the really important context of us understanding that Muslim students, certainly for the last decade or so, have been in schools being run by fabulous head teachers like Sajid, Lubna and Raza. But the political context for Muslims within the UK has been one of hostility and government organized hostility. So that's something that we can't be naive about. And it's something that we have to take into account in terms of how these teachers, these head teachers and these schools are swimming against a particular tide. So that's the first thing. And linked to that hostility, Rukhsana mentioned investing in diversity. Investing in diversity, once it left London, went up north to Yorks and Humber and became Diverse Leaders for Tomorrow. It was very, very successful in attracting a lot of Asian and largely Muslim teachers into leadership positions. But what killed Diverse Leaders for Tomorrow was the hostile environment and Trojan horse. So that's what killed Diverse Leaders for Tomorrow in terms of getting more teachers wanting to come into the profession. And so it's really, really important that in this celebration, which is what this is, of Muslim achievement, that we understand that when Lubna says she's going to be decolonizing her curriculum, like Sajid is, like Raza is, the decolonizing of that curriculum is within a context that colonized that curriculum in the first place. And so part of what we need to do is to not be naive about the environment, but find a way that we can navigate ourselves and our communities through that environment. And so I just wanted to thank all of our speakers for really contextualizing that. On a day, the 16th of June, 1976, was when Soweto South African students were protesting about being taught Afrikaans, being taught Afrikaans in South Africa instead of in their South African language. Because remember, erasure of language is erasure of culture, and it is violence. Over 300 children, including children as young as 8, were shot dead on this day in 1976. One of the reasons that I became a teacher was because of that iconic poster of Hector Peterson being carried by another young man and his sister running alongside, because students took to the street in South Africa to protest about being under white rule and so on. So these are important issues for us to be involved in. And anybody who's decolonizing the curriculum now, trust me, you're doing God's work. So thank you all very much. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Rosemary. We do have one question in the chat from Corsair, which is, what's the greatest challenge for the next 5 years for the Muslim school community in England? Which is a question to all panel members. So if you've got 2 sentences that sum up the greatest challenge. Sajid, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm kind of gearing myself. I think it follows on from what Rosemary's just said. I think one of the ways to really unlock the potential of all non-white pupils is to have a curriculum that is representative and diverse, that is decolonized, and the challenge is that, because there will be many barriers that prevent that from happening. There will be political barriers, there will be knowledge barriers, there will be leadership barriers. So it's all well and good that happening in a school where leaders understand the importance of it. But there are many schools where that isn't the case. And then it's where do they get the knowledge? And then it's how do they keep that curriculum academically rigorous? And then it's particularly at secondary GCSE, how do you ensure that you're still preparing the children for the exam? So you know, we've got to move in the right direction. However, the challenge is getting there, and that's where you know, those of us who are here, and those of us who are doing the wonderful work that's going on in places like Harper Bell School in Birmingham, from my good friend Nigel Oram, God bless him. You know, those things need to be pushed to the forefront, and we really need to support each other in this, and we need to talk, and we need to go out and see each other. That for me is a big challenge, because that's how you overcome it. It's knowledge that extinguishes the darkness, and wherever and however that darkness exists, and it's that kind of, you know, I think please forgive me if I'm misquoting, but I think Malcolm used to talk about knowledge of self, and that awareness of who we are and where we're from, and we're at the point now where that's beginning to happen in the curriculum, and there will be opposition to that. There'll be significant opposition to that. There'll be barriers to that. There'll be obstacles, and it's how do we overcome those?
Thanks, Sajid. Anyone else want to say something about that? Lubna.
I just think from the perspective of the Muslim community themselves, I think there is also an element of taking responsibility. Everything that everybody said, absolutely agree. You know, presenting the opportunity and opening the doors and having the conversations and looking at all aspects of school and school life. But I think ultimately, you know, people do need to take responsibility for themselves too, and not just sit back and let everybody else do everything and use that as a reason to not take the trouble. And this is just my viewpoint. I found that other members of the Asian community have taken the trouble to join school committees, PTAs, be school governors, and do those things and give up their time. Whereas I found literally dragging members of the Muslim community in, our parents in, it's literally been, for God's sake, what do I need to do to bring you in? I'll feed you, I'll do whatever you need to, please come in and be part of this conversation. It's your children. So that's the kind of flip side. And Sajid, you're smiling. So I think some of that's resonating with you. How difficult is it to get the dads and the mums to come in? How difficult is it? And I think that also, you know, take responsibility, I would say too, is part of that.
Okay, anyone else? Before I let Rosemary have the last word, I just want to pick up on that, what Sajid just said about knowledge extinguishes the darkness. Just to remind people that there's a period of European history known as the Dark Ages. A number of things extinguished the darkness, but one of them was the knowledge about maths and science that came from the Muslim world. It's one of the things that moved Europe on from the place it was in. So, Rosemary.
Graham, I could see that Robin was saying something, but didn't unmute himself. So I'm not sure whether Robin wants to quickly say something. Raza, I saw that you were indicating as well, you know, but time time is against us. Bless. There is a very important question in the chat from Gulzar Amin Ali. And I'm going to suggest, Robin, that one of the things that we do is what we've done previously in one of our conversations, where we actually record a response that we send out to that very important question with the rest of the information that we send out today. So really, it falls to me. It's been a fabulous 2 hours. I have been incredibly proud to be sitting in this environment with Robin, with Sajid, Lubna, Raza, and my dear friend Rukhsana Yaqoob, whom I've known for over 35 years. And it's important that we have this conversation today, because I think that sometimes what happens around different groups that are now within a situation within the UK where there is a government that's saying that there's no such thing as systemic racism, when I think all of our speakers will accept that that is it's a complete different experience that they have within you know, their environment that they're working in. It means that they have to navigate the space differently. And all the challenges that we have with all of our communities are actually exactly the same. But what I feel is that we disrupt the narrative by being a little bit more courageous and a little bit more honest about the realities of the context in which we face, and that we can stop a narrative that continues to minoritize, erase, diminish contributions from cultures that have been around for centuries and have contributed to this world. And so it was great to be able to shine the light on the Muslim community today. So thank you all very, very much indeed. And speakers, I don't know whether you can stay on for a little while afterwards if you want to, just for a little debrief, but we want to thank all of our participants, and we will ensure Gulzar is joining us from Dubai. So that's why I have to say to him, you know, we'll make sure that we send a response. And he's one of those head teachers that should be in the UK. He's one of those head teachers who went through diverse Leaders for Tomorrow and left and went to Dubai because he couldn't get a headship here in the UK. So, you know, let's deal with reality and truth, people, but it's all good and it's all love. Yeah, so thank you very much indeed.